I'm Adair Lockwood, 44, and I came up from a fishing town and an enlisted bunk to wear wings of gold and a Navy commander's stripes. For years, I went into the coldest water the ocean had, 11 times before I was ever an officer, and pulled out people who could not pull themselves. But when a young pilot told a packed ready room that I had not earned my wings, and then punched out into a black sea 2 nights later with no swimmer left aboard but me, I made a choice that told the truth better than any speech could. Have you ever been written off by someone who never once asked who you were? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you have ever had to stand up for yourself after being underestimated, hit that like button and subscribe. The winter I turned 12, the bar at the mouth of our harbor took my father's boat in front of me, and a stranger in a flight suit gave him back. I have spent 32 years trying to be that stranger. It happened on a gray afternoon in 1994. The kind of day our town treated as ordinary, even though the sea was anything but. My father ran crab pots out past the breakwater, and he had run them in worse weather than that. So when the storm came up faster than the radio said it would, no one panicked, least of all him. I was standing on the breakwater with my mother, watching the channel markers buck in the chop when his boat came over the bar wrong. One wave lifted the stern, the next one buried the bow, and then the hull was upside down and my father was a small dark shape in water the color of wet slate. I did not scream. I have thought about that a great deal in the years since, the strange stillness that comes over some people when the worst thing is actually happening. My mother screamed enough for both of us. I just watched, and I memorized, the way you memorize something you already know you will spend your life trying to undo. The helicopter came from the air station up the coast. I heard it before I saw it, a hard beating in the low clouds, and then it was over the water with its nose down, and a man on a cable sliding out of the open door. He dropped into seas that had already beaten a grown man, and he did not hesitate at the surface the way a sane person would. He swam straight into the wreck, got my father, and held him up out of the water with one arm while the cable came down for them both. He never looked at the shore. He never gave his name. He handed my father to the corpsman on the deck of a rescue boat and went back up the wire into the clouds. And that was the end of it for him. Just another afternoon. It was not the end of it for me. My father came home 3 days later, alive and quiet, and changed in a way I did not have words for then. He sat at our kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a coffee mug he was not drinking, and he kept looking at his own fingers like he was surprised to still have them. I was 12. I did not understand yet that a man can be rescued from the water and still spend years climbing out of it. But I understood the most important thing, which was this. Somewhere in the world, there were people whose entire job was to go into the place that takes everyone else, and to come back out holding a life that was not theirs. Other kids in my class wanted to be the pilot. I had watched the pilot stay safe and warm up in the aircraft where pilots belong. I wanted to be the one who goes into the water when the flying is over and a person is about to become a statistic. I never told anyone that. It was not the kind of thing a girl in a fishing town said out loud. I just carried it, year after year, the way you carry a stone you have decided is yours. I swam competitively in high school. Not because I loved racing, but because the pool was the closest thing I had to training. I lifted. I ran the beach at low tide in the cold. My mother thought it was a phase. My father, who never said much after the boat, watched me with an expression I could not read until much later, when I finally recognized it as fear wearing the face of pride. The day I turned 18, in the spring of 2000, I drove to the recruiter's office 2 towns over and told the man behind the desk that I wanted to be a Navy rescue swimmer. He looked at me the way men would look at me for the next 3 decades, the quick downward glance that finishes a sentence before you have spoken it. He told me the aviation rescue swimmer pipeline washed out most people who started it, and that it drowned their confidence first, on purpose, before it ever drowned anything else. I told him I had been getting ready for this since I was 12. I signed the papers. My mother cried. My father simply nodded, one time, like a man acknowledging a debt he had always known would come due. The school was everything the recruiter promised and worse. They put us in the water and took away every easy assumption we had about our own competence. They tied us in knots and let us figure out how to come undone without air. People I respected quit. People stronger than me quit. The instructors were not cruel exactly. They were honest, in the brutal way the ocean is honest, because the ocean was the thing they were preparing us to face, and the ocean does not grade on effort. I made it through, because I had a picture in my head that would not leave, of a man on a cable who did not hesitate at the surface. I earned the rescue swimmer qualification in 2001, when I was 19 years old. And the first time I went out for real, I understood that nothing about training had been an exaggeration. People do not behave gracefully when they are drowning. They fight you. They climb you. They try to use your body as a ladder out of the place they are dying in, and they will take you down with them without meaning to, because terror is not interested in your plans. My first save was a fisherman in 2002, off a trawler that was going down by the stern in heavy seas. I got to him, and he did exactly what they all do. He grabbed me and pushed me under in his panic, and I did exactly what I had been trained to do, which is to break the grip, get behind, and take control of a person who does not want to be controlled, even though it is the only thing that will save him. I got the strop on him. I got him up the wire. On the deck afterward, shaking, he did not thank me. They almost never do in the moment. Gratitude comes later, on dry steel, when the body stops believing it is about to die. There was a woman in my early aircrew days named Belen Ortega, a swimmer a few years senior to me, hard and funny and completely without illusions. She watched me go out on that trawler call and come back gray-faced and still vibrating, and she said the truest thing anyone said to me in those years. She told me I did not pace myself out there, that I went into every call like it was the last one anyone would ever need, and that one day that was going to cost me. She was right. I did not know how to pace myself. The sea never did, so I could never see why I should. We would be friends for the next 24 years, Belen and I, two people who learned to swim in the same cold water, and she would be the only person aboard a certain aircraft carrier, a very long time from that trawler, who knew exactly what my hands had done. But that is getting ahead of the story. In those early years, I was simply a young woman in a wetsuit on a heaving deck at dawn, looking at the water like it was a debt I intended to keep paying for the rest of my life. I had no idea yet how much the Navy would ask me to prove, again and again, to people who had already decided what I was. The years after that compress in my memory the way busy years do, but the pattern in them is sharp, and the pattern is the whole point. I made petty officer first class. I became a master rescue swimmer, which is to say I became one of the people who trains the people who go into the water, and I had pulled 11 human beings out of the ocean before the Navy ever let me touch the controls of an aircraft. 11. I knew their number the way you know a scar. And then, in 2007, when I was 25, I was selected for a program called Seaman to Admiral, which takes enlisted sailors and turns them into commissioned officers, and the Navy decided that the woman who had been jumping out of helicopters might be allowed to fly one instead. I will tell you a secret about earning your wings of gold after you have already spent 6 years pulling broken pilots out of the sea. The wings feel heavier than any medal they will ever give you. Most aviators earn their wings as the first hard thing they have ever done, and they wear them like a birthright. I earned mine in 2009 knowing exactly what they cost because I had counted the cost personally 11 times in the water. I did not love the wings. I respected them, the way you respect something that has tried to kill people you have held. I transitioned to the F/A-18, the fighter, and I was good at it, not because I was a natural, but because I had already learned the only lesson that matters in aviation, which is that the aircraft does not care how you feel, and the moment you forget, that is the moment it begins to plan your funeral. I flew my first fleet tour in 2011 as a lieutenant, in a squadron under a lieutenant commander named Russell Ferreira, a calm and serious man who would matter to the story far down the line in a way neither of us could have guessed then. And through all of it, through every promotion and every new set of collar devices, I paid the same quiet tax. I want to be precise about this, because it is the thing that this whole story turns on. Nobody ever stood up and announced that they thought less of me. It was never that loud. It was 1,000 small moments instead. It was the contractor at the squadron who handed me his parking validation because he assumed I was the front desk admin. It was the junior officer who explained my own aircraft to me, slowly, using small words because he had decided in the first 3 seconds that I could not possibly know what he knew. It was the wardroom that went to half-beat quiet when I mentioned, once, that I had come up enlisted, the way a room goes quiet when someone says something slightly embarrassing. There is a particular smile people give you when they have already finished deciding you are less than you are. I came to know that smile very well. It is not hostile. That is what makes it so hard to fight. It is patient and a little fond, the smile you give a child who is trying her best. For a long time in my 20s, that smile made me want to slap my credentials down on the table and make people read them. But I learned something better, slowly, the way you learn anything worth keeping. I learned to wait it out. The truth, I came to understand, is enormously patient. It does not need me to defend it. It only needs me to keep doing the work, and eventually, the work speaks in a voice that no smile can talk over. So by the time the story actually starts, in the late autumn of 2026, I was 44 years old, a commander in the United States Navy, a naval aviator with wings of gold and a master rescue swimmer qualification I had never once let lapse, which is so unusual for an officer of my rank that most people assumed it was a clerical error when they saw it in my record. I had been sent out to a carrier as a senior aviator on the strike group staff to help run a fleet readiness evaluation. It was not a glamorous job. It was the kind of job they give to someone they trust to be thorough and quiet and to embarrass no one unnecessarily. I crossed the brow of that carrier in a plain flight suit with no squadron patch on the shoulder, traveling light, carrying my own bag. I had learned long ago that I never needed a room to know who I was before I had done anything in it, and I had stopped trying to make rooms understand me in advance. A young flight deck sailor, a petty officer named Wyatt Soto, all of 23 years old, took my bag from me at the top of the brow out of simple good manners, and from the way he carried it, I could tell he had decided I was a reserve staffer, come out to push paper for a week. I let him think it. It was nearly true, and it cost me nothing, and I had long since stopped spending energy on corrections that the truth would handle for free. It was in the passageway outside the ready room on my first full day aboard that I first heard Lieutenant Chase Donnelly. You hear some men before you see them. He was holding court, the way the loudest 28-year-old in any room holds court, telling a story in which he was the hero and the laws of physics were his personal assistants. He was a nugget, a brand new fleet pilot, winged about 3 years, with the particular shine that comes off a young man who has been good at everything easy and has never yet met anything hard enough to teach him the difference. He clocked my flight suit as I passed, registered the missing patch, the lack of a squadron, and dismissed me in a single downward glance I had seen 10,000 times. He said to his audience, not quite quietly enough, that I was probably staff, that they sent people out here to count flight hours and tell real aviators they were doing it wrong. I paused at the ready room hatch a moment longer than I needed to. Not because the comment stung, it did not. I had been hearing some version of it since I was 18. I paused because I recognized his certainty, the bright, unshakable certainty of a man whose confidence has never once been tested by deep, cold water, and I felt something that surprised me, which was not anger. It was something closer to recognition, and underneath the recognition, faint as a current you cannot see from the surface. Something that felt almost like worry. I did not know yet why. I went in and took a seat at the back and opened my evaluation binder, and I did not give Lieutenant Donnelly another thought. The sea would introduce us properly soon enough. The next morning, the ready room filled for the brief before a major flight evolution, and Lieutenant Donnelly decided to make a joke out of me in front of everyone. I was in the back again, reviewing the schedule on the screen, the same plain flight suit, the same absent patch. The room was full, 30 or 40 aviators and aircrew, the energy high and a little showy the way it gets the day before a big push. Petty Officer Soto was near the hatch, and I noticed him go still in a way that told me a chief had said something to him about who I might be, because his eyes kept cutting to me and then away, uneasy. He tried to catch Donnelly's eye with a small warning shake of the head. Donnelly read it exactly backward. To a man like that, a warning is a dare. He came over and leaned on the back of the chair in front of me and performed. That is the only word for it. He was not really talking to me. He was talking to the room, using me as a prop. He said, loud enough to carry, "Let me guess, you flew a desk all the way to a Goldwing photo op, and now they have sent you out here to grade actual aviators on how we do the job you read about." A few people laughed, not because it was funny, but because he was senior enough in the room's little social order that laughing was the safe move, and most people, most of the time, take the safe move. I looked up at him, calm, and I said nothing. because I had been in this exact moment 100 times before, and I knew that the only thing that ever changes is the face. He took my silence as permission, the way his kind always does. He glanced down at the wings on my chest, then at my bare sleeve, where a squadron patch should be, and he smirked, and he delivered the line that I would carry out of that room and down into the cold water and back up again 2 nights later. He said, "You haven't earned those wings, sweetheart. Some of us actually had to fly for them." The room laughed. Not all of it, but enough of it, and I did the thing the people watching would remember, which was nothing. I held his eyes for 1 steady second, and I did not flinch, and I did not explain, and I did not reach for the long list of things I could have said that would have ended him in front of his peers. I have learned across a whole career that the loudest man in any room is almost never the most dangerous one. He is simply the easiest to hear. The dangerous people are quiet. I am quiet. Senior Chief Belen Ortega was standing at the back of the room. Belen, my friend of 24 years, the woman who taught me to pace myself in water I never learned to pace myself in, was now an E8, a senior chief, a rescue swimmer leader on this very ship, which I had not advertised to anyone because that was Belen's business and not a card I played. She took 1 hard step forward to end it, because Belen has never in her life let an insult to me stand if she had legs to cross the room. I caught her eye. I gave her the smallest shake of my head. Not yet, not like this. Not in a way that makes me the woman who needed rescuing from a junior officer's bad joke. Belen stopped. She did not like it. Later in the passage, she said to me, "Lo, you are going to let him keep that," and it was not really a question. It was an accusation, gently delivered, by someone who loved me and thought I was being foolish with my own dignity. I told her, for now. I told her the sea has a way of sorting out who actually earned what, and that I had never once had to do that job myself, because the water is far more thorough than I could ever be, and it keeps better records. I closed my binder in a room I had chosen not to win. Donnelly went back to his seat, lit up with the small, clean glow of a man who thinks he has won something, and who does not understand that the thing he won was borrowed, and that the loan was about to be called in by an ocean that does not care what any of us are called. That night, Belen and I stood out on the catwalk that runs along the side of the ship below the flight deck, with the black Pacific sliding past 40 feet beneath us, and we talked the way only 2 people who learned the same hard thing at the same young age can talk. The catwalk at night is one of the few private places on a warship. The wind takes your words, and the dark takes your face, and you can finally say the things that daylight and rank make impossible. Belen and I had been having versions of this conversation since we were both young and stupid and indestructible. Except now we were neither young nor indestructible, only stubborn, which is what is left after the other 2 wear off. She said it again, plainer this time. "He called you sweetheart in front of 40 people a dare. He said you did not earn your wings. And you sat there." I told her he did, and tomorrow the ocean will not care what he called me. I meant it as a way of closing the subject. I did not know I was describing the next 48 hours. We talked about the wings, because Belen is the only person who has ever fully understood the strange double thing I carry. Most pilots, I told her, spend their entire careers hoping they never meet a rescue swimmer, because meeting one means the worst day of your life has arrived. I became a pilot and stayed a swimmer because I could never quite decide which side of the cable I belonged on. Belen laughed at that, the short, rough laugh of someone who has had the same argument with herself. She told me I belonged on whichever side had a person who needed getting. She was right, she usually is. And then she told me a small thing, almost in passing, the way the most important information in a life usually arrives, with no music under it. She said the duty rescue swimmer for tomorrow's evolution, a good young man named Reyes, had wrecked his shoulder on a hoist 3 days earlier and was on light duty, and that the detachment was thin, and that if anything actually went into the water during the big push tomorrow, the ship was 1 swimmer short. I heard it the way you hear a door open, somewhere in a house you thought was empty. I did not say anything dramatic. I noted it, the way I note weather. I was still master current as a rescue swimmer, a fact that lived in my record like a strange fossil, and I filed Belen's words next to that fact without letting myself look directly at what the 2 of them might add up to. I told her only that I hoped the night went quiet. She said she hoped so too. Neither of us believed in hoping. We believed in being ready, which is a different and lonelier thing. Before I turned in, I wrote a few lines to my father, who still lives by the same harbor where the water took him and gave him back. He is old now, slower, but his mind is clear, and he likes to hear that the sea is treating me well. I told him the water was good out here, calm and cold and honest. I did not tell him I had spent the evening thinking about going back into it, because there are some fears you do not hand to a man who already spent 50 years afraid of the same thing on your behalf. I sealed the note. I lay in my rack and listened to the ship breathe. The great slow groan of steel that anyone who has lived at sea hears as a kind of lullaby, and I thought, the way you do at the edge of sleep, that I had been underestimated in that ready room by a boy who flew like the ocean was a rumor, and that the ocean had a way of curing people of that particular illness, and that I genuinely hoped, that it would not have to cure Lieutenant Donnelly the hard way. The flight evolution began the following night under a building weather front, and Lieutenant Donnelly launched off the catapult with his voice bright and easy on the radio, showing off in the pattern the way he showed off in the ready room, because to a certain kind of young man, there is no difference between a cockpit and an audience. I was on the flight deck for the evolution as an evaluator, which is to say I was standing in the island spaces with a radio and a clipboard, watching the recovery, grading the ship's performance at the thing the ship exists to do. The weather was coming up. The sea state was building, long cold swells out of the northwest, and the wind across the deck had that edge to it that makes everyone a little quieter, a little more careful, because everyone who works on a flight deck at night knows that the margin between routine and catastrophe out there is measured in seconds and feet. Donnelly flew beautifully and like a man who did not believe in consequences, which are two things that can be true at once, right up until the moment they cannot. I heard him in the pattern, crisp, a little too pleased with himself, and I remember thinking, with no malice in it, that he was the kind of pilot who was going to be very good in about 10 years if he lived through the part where he thought he already was. On his approach, the jet died. It is a strange thing to hear an emergency happen over a radio, because the radio strips away everything except the voices and the facts arrive faster than your heart can keep up with them. A compressor stall first, that ugly rhythmic banging an engine makes when the air stops flowing the way it must. Then a flame out. Then the slow killing arithmetic of an aircraft with no thrust on final approach at night, altitude bleeding away, the meatball on the optical landing system dropping, the airplane becoming, second by second, less of a machine and more of a falling weight. The landing signal officer's voice came across the net, and there was no panic in it, only the trained flat urgency that is somehow more frightening than a scream. "Power," he said. "Power." And then, when there was no power to be had, he said the words that every aviator and every soul on that deck dreads. 3 times, the way you are taught to say them, so they cannot be misheard. Eject, eject, eject. I saw it happen. Out beyond the bow, in the dark, the canopy came off the jet in a flash of motion, and then the seat fired, a hard white streak of rocket against the black, and a parachute bloomed open and began to drift down, sideways in the wind, toward water that was 55 degrees and moving. The jet itself went into the sea a moment later and was simply gone, swallowed without ceremony, the way the ocean takes everything, with no interest in what it had been. The bridge called away the rescue helicopter, the plane guard helo that orbits during every recovery for exactly this reason. And then, in the island, in the space of about 4 seconds, I watched a system run out of the one person it had been counting on. The word came across that Reyes, the duty rescue swimmer, could not make the hoist. His shoulder, the one he had wrecked 3 days before, would not hold a one-arm rescue in a building sea. And a rescue swimmer who cannot trust his arm in cold, moving water is not a rescue swimmer. That night, he is the second person about to need rescuing. The debt was thin. Belen had told me it was thin. And now there was a 28-year-old lieutenant in 55-degree water a half-mile off the bow with a parachute on top of him. And the ship was 1 swimmer short. There is a specific quality of silence that happens when a system runs out of the person it was built around. It is not loud. It is a held breath with a clock running inside it. I have heard that silence before, many times across my career, and I will tell you something that I am not proud of, and that is nonetheless true. That silence is usually aimed at me. It is the silence of a room realizing it needs the person it had decided not to take seriously. I was already moving before anyone formally asked me anything. I was down the ladder and onto the flight deck, pulling a dry suit over my flight suit, because there was a rescue swimmer's gear staged near the helo, as there always is, and because I was the only master-qualified rescue swimmer aboard who could lift her own arm, and because I knew it the way you know your own name. A young air crewman, trying to do his job, put a hand out and said, "Ma'am, you cannot. You are staff." I did not have time to explain a career to him. I said, "I am current. Get me a harness." And something in my voice, the voice of a master swimmer and not a staff officer, made him stop arguing and start helping. I did not decide to save the man who had insulted me in front of 40 people. I want to be very clear about that because people love that version of the story and it is not the true one. I did not think about Lieutenant Donnelly at all. I decided to save the man in the water. The fact that they were the same person was, to me, in that moment, an irrelevance. A coincidence the ocean had arranged and did not care about. The water does not check your record before it kills you, and neither do I before I go in. They got me to the helo. The rotor wash was flattening the black sea below into a wide, pale disk of spray. And somewhere in the center of that disk was a parachute spread on the surface like a stain. And under the parachute was a person who had maybe 4 minutes left of the kind of consciousness that helps you survive. I clipped into the hoist. I sat in the open door with my legs out over nothing, the cold air screaming past, the dark water heaving 40 feet down, and then 30, and then 20 as the pilot brought us in. And I did the thing I had wanted to do since I was 12 years old, standing on a breakwater. I looked down at the water that takes everyone, and I stepped out of the aircraft into the dark, on purpose, to go get somebody. The sea hit me like a wall, the way it always does, 55 degrees, driving the breath out of my chest in one hard, involuntary gasp. And then the training took the body back from the shock, and I started to swim. Donnelly was tangled. That was the immediate problem, and very nearly the fatal one. When a parachute comes down on the water, it does not simply float aside, it spreads across the surface, and then sinks slowly. And the shroud lines, 28 feet of them, become a net that wraps a man as he struggles, and the more he fights, the tighter the net becomes. He was half-conscious, hypothermic already, his lips going the color that tells you the clock is real, and he was wrapped in his own canopy, and he was doing the thing all of them do, the thing the fisherman did to me in 2002. He was fighting the only thing in the water, trying to keep him alive. I came up behind him, the way you are taught, never in front, because a drowning man in front of you is a man who will climb you into the sea. I got my knife, and I cut the shroud lines off him in long, sawing strokes, working by feel in water so dark I could not see my own hands, the swells lifting us both and dropping us, the canopy pulling at us like something alive that wanted to keep him. He fought me. He did not know me. He did not know anything except cold and terror. And terror is not grateful. Terror does not read your collar devices. Terror only wants up and out, and it will use your body to get there. I broke his grip when he grabbed me, the same break I had done 11 times before my commission and more times after, and I got behind him and got my arm across his chest and got the rescue strap down over his head and under his arms, and I put my mouth close to his ear and I said, the thing I have said to all of them, the only thing that ever reaches a person that far gone. I said, I have got you. Stop fighting the man who has got you. I felt him hear it, not understand it exactly. Hear it, the way an animal hears a calm voice and stops thrashing for 1 second, and 1 second was all I needed. I gave the hoist signal. The cable came taut, and the two of us came up out of the Pacific together, spinning slowly on the wire, the wind trying to swing us into the helo's belly. And I kept my body between him and the worst of the spin the whole way up, because that is the job. The job is that you take the part of it that would have hit him. You have always taken it. You became this so that you could take it. They pulled us into the helo and then onto the deck, and there were corpsmen and oxygen and blankets and the controlled chaos of a flight deck saving a life. And Lieutenant Donnelly was alive. Cold to the core, half drowned, but alive, his heart beating, his lungs working. A man who, 20 minutes earlier, had been a falling weight in the dark and was now a person, again because a system that had run out of swimmers had not, quite, run out of me. I pulled off my hood. My hair was plastered to my head, and there was salt burning in my eyes, and I was shaking with the cold in the way you cannot stop and do not try to. And Donnelly, on the litter, with an oxygen mask fogging over his gray face, looked up and saw the swimmer who had gone into the water for him. He saw the woman from the ready room. I watched it land on him. I watched the blood go out of his face for a reason that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with the debt arriving that he did not know he had been running up. He said it through the mask, so quiet I read it as much as heard it. He said it was you. He said it the way a man reads a bill he did not know he owed and cannot possibly pay. And I did not say anything back because there was nothing yet to say, and because I was busy being wrapped in a blanket by a corpsman who kept telling me, "Ma'am, you are hypothermic, you have to come inside," and because the truth was now lying on the deck between us, dripping, wearing my gloves, and it did not need my help to be understood. In the days that followed, the truth did its slow, thorough work, and I did not have to lift a finger to help it. There was a mishap investigation, as there always is when an aircraft goes into the sea, and an investigation is a machine for assembling facts in an order that cannot be argued with. It established what had failed in the engine, and it established the timeline, and embedded in that timeline, unavoidable, was the simple arithmetic of who had been where. The duty swimmer down, the debt short, the aircraft in the water, and then a master qualified rescue swimmer, a commander, a staff evaluator, going off the hoist into a 55-degree sea at night to bring back the pilot. The facts did not editorialize. They did not have to. The story of the ready room and the story of the rescue sat in the same wing, in the same mouths, and they collided without my saying a single word against him. I want to be honest about what that was like to watch, because it was not the clean triumph people imagine. It was harder than that, and stranger. I watched a 28-year-old man come apart. Lieutenant Donnelly's certainty had been the load-bearing wall of his entire personality, and the sea had knocked it out, and everything he had built on top of it, the swagger, the easy contempt, the bright, unbothered confidence, came down in a heap. He stopped talking in the ready room. He sat on the edge of his rack and stared at his own hands, and Petty Officer Soto, who saw a great deal from the edges of rooms, told me later that Donnelly had asked him, quietly, whether everyone had known who I was, and Soto had told him the truth, which was that almost everyone had figured it out except him because everyone else had bothered to wonder, and he had not. I did not push. This is the part that people who want a revenge story do not like, but it is the heart of the thing, so I will say it plainly. I did not need to do anything to Lieutenant Donnelly. I did not need to report his comment. I did not need to repeat it. I did not need to stand over him while he understood. The water had already said everything that needed saying, in a language he could no longer pretend not to speak, and my part was simply to not interfere with his education. The cruelest thing I could have done, and the most satisfying in the small, ugly way satisfaction sometimes calls to you, would have been to make a speech. So I made no speech. I let him sit with it. A young pilot on the edge of a rack, staring at his own hands, beginning, maybe for the first time in his charmed life, to understand what hands are actually for. And I will tell you, watching him, I did not feel the thing I had half expected to feel. I had carried his insult into the water and back. You haven't earned those wings, sweetheart. And a meaner version of me had assumed there would be some pleasure in watching him learn how wrong he had been. There was none. There was only the old tiredness, and under it something almost like tenderness, because I had been 28 once, and certain once, though never that loud, and I knew that the thing breaking in him was the thing that had to break before anything real could be built. I had seen the sea do this before. The sea is the best teacher I have ever known, and the most expensive, and its lessons do not come with the comfort of being gentle. Belen found me on the catwalk again 2 nights after the rescue. She stood beside me and looked at the water for a while without saying anything, which from Belen is a kind of eloquence. Then she said, "You could have let him drown in what he said. You could have at least let him sit in it longer before you went in." And I told her the only true answer, which was that I never got to decide who was worth saving, that the moment I started deciding that in the water was the moment I stopped being any good at this, and that the same was true on dry land if I was honest about it. Belen thought about that for a long time. Then she said, "That is a hard way to live, Adair." And I said, "I know. It is the only way I know how." The thing is, none of it was finished. A man being broken open is not the same as a man being remade. That part was still to come, and it would not come from me. And it would not come from the investigation. It would have to come from him and from the only thing that ever truly remakes a person, which is the slow, unglamorous work of becoming worthy of a thing you were given before you deserved it. Donnelly came to find me on the catwalk a few days later, once he was off the medical hold and back on light duty. And he tried, at first, to give me an apology that I would not accept because it was the wrong apology. I knew it was coming. You can feel an apology approaching the way you feel weather. He came down the ladder to the catwalk where I was standing my usual evening watch over the water, and he stood a respectful distance away, and he began to speak, and within about 2 sentences I understood that he had written it. He had crafted it. It was a good apology, fluent and complete, the apology you give to a promotion board or a commanding officer, full of phrases like deeply inappropriate and failed to show proper respect and conduct unbecoming. It was aimed at my rank. It was the apology of a man who had finally read my collar devices and was addressing them. I let it die in the air. When he finished, I did not fill the silence for him, which is the cruelest and kindest thing you can do to a person who is performing. I let him stand in the quiet until he understood that the performance had not worked. Then I said, "That is the apology you would give a board. Try again without the audience." He stood there. The bright, certain thing in him was gone, and what was left was younger and rawer, and for the first time, real. He tried again, and this time it came out broken and unrehearsed and true. He said he had decided what I was the second he saw me, the way he decided everything, fast and loud, because deciding fast had always worked for him, had always gotten the laugh, had always put him at the center of the room. He said he had looked at a flight suit with no patch and a quiet woman, and he had built a whole person out of nothing, a person he could be better than, because being better than someone was how he knew where he stood. And then he said the thing that I think actually cost him something to say. He said I would be dead right now because of a woman I tried to make small. He said it, and his voice did not survive the end of the sentence. I let that sit too, but differently. Then I told him the thing I most needed him to hear. I told him he was looking at it wrong. I told him this was not how it worked, that I did not get to choose who was worth pulling out of the water, and that he would not get to choose either, not once he was any good at this job, and that the day he started choosing was the day he should hang it up. He said, "You should have let me sit in the water," with what I said. And I said, "No. That is exactly the thing I am trying to teach you. You do not get to want that, not for yourself and not for anyone else, because the wanting of it is the same disease you already have, just pointed inward." He asked me what he could do. They always ask that, the ones who are actually changing, because the ones who are not changing never think there is anything to do. And I told him the only thing I wanted, which surprised him, because it was not an apology, and it was not deference, and it was not him standing when I entered a room. I told him I did not want his apology framed and hung on a wall where he could feel good looking at it. I wanted it spent on the next nugget who needs someone to go into the water for him. Spent on the next person Donnelly was tempted to decide about too fast and too small a way, in the first 3 seconds before anyone has earned the right to be known. I told him that an apology you keep is worthless, and an apology you spend on someone else is the only kind that was ever worth anything. Belen watched this from a distance because Belen watches everything, and afterward she came and stood beside me and gave her verdict, which I valued more than any boards. She said, "He might make it." Then, after a moment, because she is fair, she said, "You did that." And I told her the truth, which is that I did not do it. The water did it. I only translated. Belen snorted. She has never accepted my habit of giving the ocean credit for the things my own hands do. But she let it stand, because she knew what I meant. The sea breaks people open. Whether anything good grows in the opening is up to them, and to whoever is standing nearby, willing to be patient. We stood there, the 3 of us across that week, an insult and a silence and a rescue, slowly becoming something else. 2 old swimmers and 1 young pilot who had finally, at 28, met something hard enough to teach him the difference between being good at the easy things and being good. He stood on the same deck we stood on now, and he looked at the same ocean, and for the first time he looked at it the way Belen and I look at it, which is to say with respect, which is to say with the right kind of fear. A man who is afraid of the sea in the right way is a man who might someday be trusted to go into it for someone else. That is the whole of the curriculum. There is nothing else in it. The evaluation came to its end, and the wing had quietly rearranged itself around the woman in the unmarked flight suit. And then Captain Russell Ferreira made the rearrangement official in a way that set the record straight without ever stooping to settle a score. Time at sea passes in evolutions, and after the rescue the evolutions kept coming, and the readiness evaluation I had been sent to run wound toward its close. Somewhere in there, The ship and the wing had simply recalibrated. People who had laughed in the ready room now found small reasons to walk past me and nod. The chiefs, who always know everything first, had known from the start, and the officers caught up the way officers do, late and then all at once. I did not enjoy it, exactly. After 30 years, being suddenly seen is its own strange discomfort, like a light coming on in a room you had grown used to sitting in dark. Captain Russell Ferreira was the carrier air wing commander, the SIG, the man who runs all the squadrons on the ship. And he was reviewing the mishap and rescue reports as his job required, and he came to my name, and he stopped. I know he stopped because he told me later that he had read it 3 times to be sure. Russ Ferreira had been a lieutenant commander in 2011, a department head in the squadron where I flew my first fleet tour as a brand new lieutenant, fresh from earning wings I already knew the weight of. He had known me before I was a commander, before the staff job. Back when I was the prior enlisted aviator, the other pilots found a little unnerving because I had pulled people like them out of the sea and did not flinch at things that made them flinch. He had not forgotten. Good men do not forget the people who were quietly excellent before anyone was watching. He convened the wing. An all-officers meeting, every aviator in every squadron, the same people, more or less, who had filled the ready room the morning Donnelly made his joke. I did not know it was coming. I was simply told to attend, and I went, and I took a seat, not at the back this time because Ferreira had a sailor save me a seat near the front, which I understood, once I sat in it, was itself a message. Ferreira did not raise his voice. He has never been a man who needed to. He stood in front of the assembled wing, and he said he wanted to clear up a small matter of fact, because facts, he said, are the only thing that keep aviators alive, and a wing that is careless with facts in the ready room will be careless with them in the air. Then briefly, without flourish, reading from nothing, he told them who I was. He told them I had enlisted at 18 and earned the rescue swimmer qualification at 19. He told them I had pulled 11 people out of the ocean before I was ever commissioned. He told them I earned my wings of gold in 2009, and he let the room do the arithmetic on that, which meant I had earned my wings the year some of the junior officers in that room had started high school. He told them I had served a department head tour and that I held a current master rescue swimmer qualification that I had never once let lapse, which no officer of my rank does, because it is hard and unglamorous, and there is no reward for it except the ability to do exactly the thing I had done 2 nights before. And then he said the only thing in his remarks that came close to a rebuke, and it was not aimed at any one person, though everyone in the room who needed to feel it, felt it. He said, "The officer who went into the water 2 nights ago earned her wings before some of you could drive a car. She also earned the right to pull you out of the ocean when you cannot fly anymore. Try to be worth the trouble." The room that had laughed sat very still. And then Lieutenant Chase Donnelly stood up. No one ordered it. There was no call to attention, no protocol that demanded it. He simply rose to his feet, on his own, and stood at attention as I sat there, and held it, and the gesture cost him in front of his peers exactly what it should have cost. Which is to say, it cost him the last of the person he had been pretending to be. He stood up not because anyone told him to. He stood up because he had finally understood what standing is for. It is not for the rank. It is for the recognition of a thing larger than yourself, briefly made visible in another person, and the willingness to be smaller than it in public. I did not stand. I did not need to. I met his eyes, and I gave him a small nod, the nod you give a young person who has just done the first genuinely hard thing of his life, and he sat back down, and the meeting moved on to other business, and that was the whole of it. No speeches from me, no vindication. Only a record set, straight by a fair man, in a quiet room, in front of the people for whom it would matter. That night I sat with what I felt, and what I felt was not the triumph I might have predicted 30 years ago. I had spent 3 decades being underestimated and almost never correcting the record, letting the truth keep its own slow schedule, and I had built a whole way of living on the idea that I did not need to be known in order to be worth something. And now, having been known, suddenly and completely, in front of an entire air wing, I found myself wondering, for the first time in my life, what it would actually feel like to simply be known. Not to prove anything, just to be seen for the shape I actually was. I did not have an answer that night. I only had the question, sitting in the dark with me, larger and quieter than I expected. On my last morning aboard, I went out to the edge of the flight deck at first light, and the sea that had tested me my whole life looked, for once, like it had nothing left to prove against me, and I made my peace with the long, unglamorous shape of everything I had been. The water was calm that morning, the front long gone, the swells low and slow and silver in the dawn. I stood at the deck edge where the safety nets begin, and I looked down at the Pacific, the same ocean, the same cold, honest thing that had taken my father and given him back when I was 12. The same water I had gone into more times than I could count, for fishermen and aviators and one young lieutenant who had said I had not earned the wings I wore. And that morning, it looked like an old friend who had finally, after 44 years, stopped testing me, and had instead simply come to sit beside me and watch the sun come up. There was a letter from my father by my rack when I went back in. He had heard about the rescue, the way harbor towns hear about everything, the news traveling along the coast through the old network of people who used to fish together. He wrote in the careful hand of a man who did not write often. He said he had spent 50 years wishing he could find the swimmer who pulled him out of the water in 1994, the one who never gave his name, just to tell him that it had mattered, that a whole life had grown out of that one cold afternoon, mine included. And then he wrote a line I have kept. He wrote, "I think now that maybe the not knowing was the point. Maybe a man like that does not do it to be thanked. Maybe he does it so that someday the girl in the breakwater grows up and does it for someone else." I sat with that for a long while. I had become the stranger in the flight suit. I had become the one who goes into the water and comes back up holding a life that is not mine, and then goes back up the wire without giving my name. And I would almost certainly never be thanked by Lieutenant Donnelly in any way that the world would recognize as thanks. And I found, reading my father's letter, that I had finally made my peace with being unthanked. The work is the thanks. It was always the work. The going in was the whole of the reward, and I had been looking for the reward somewhere outside the water for far too long. I saw Donnelly one more time before I transferred off. I did not seek him out. I came around a corner in the hangar bay, and there he was, and he did not see me, because he was busy. He was standing with a brand new pilot, a kid even greener than he had been, and he was talking the kid through something. Patiently, quietly, with none of the swagger and all of the attention, repaying the debt exactly the way I had told him to repay it, spending the apology on someone else instead of framing it on a wall. He never saw me watching. That was right. That was how it was supposed to be. He never did say thank you to me in words, and he never did frame the apology, and he never once, as far as I know, told the story of being saved by the woman he insulted, because telling it would have made it about him again. He just spent it. That is the only kind of apology that was ever worth anything, and he spent it well. So let me say the last of it to you directly, whoever you are listening to this. If you have ever been decided about, sized up and written off in a room by someone who never once asked who you actually were, hear me, because I have lived a whole life inside that experience, and I have learned the one thing that matters about it. You do not owe those people a correction. You do not have to slap your credentials down on the table and make them read every line. Let them keep their small, wrong picture of you if they want it. Go and do the work that only you can do, the cold, hard, unglamorous work that is yours and no one else's. And let the truth keep its own slow, patient schedule. The truth always arrives. I have watched it arrive my entire life. It comes in its own time and not in yours, and usually it comes when the water is at its coldest and the system has run out of everyone else. And you, the one they did not take seriously, are the only one left who can swim. Be ready for that morning. It is coming. And when it comes, you will not need to say a word. You will simply go into the water the way you always could, and you will come back up holding the proof, and you will let it drip on the deck, and you will let it speak for itself. It always does. If you have ever been the quiet one that a whole room decided about too fast, the one who let the work speak instead of raising your voice, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Would you have gone into the water for the man who mocked you in front of everyone? Do you believe Lieutenant Donnelly truly changed or only got scared straight for a season? And have you ever watched the truth finally arrive on its own, long after you had stopped waiting for it? Tell me below. I read everyone. And if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and stay a while.